must have been a bit older than 11 when my family started going to the new church. This church was less extravagant than the last, though it was still large and beautiful. Unlike the previous church, this one had a youth group, and at the start of the service, the pastor would call forward children from different age groups, and each group would be shuffled off individually. Having always been bored in church, it wasn't difficult to get me to agree to go to the youth group. I didn't have to sit quietly in the pews with only my active imagination to entertain me. I got to go outside at the very least. The youth group building was separate from the church itself, across a parking lot. We would walk over there and be taken into classrooms. We would all sit in a circle and read Bible stories or talk about Jesus or what have you. In many ways, it was similar to Sunday school, except the people here actually answered my questions. And thus, ironically, it was the church that was first to remove some of my logically flawed and completely unsupported beliefs. It was explained to me that no, black cats were not agents of Satan. Ladders were not portals to hell. I asked, why then were they bad luck? My youth group leader told me that they were not. It was just a superstition, and I didn't have to be afraid of those things. I remember asking if Satan was a superstition as well. He told me, no, Satan wasn't a superstition, but that I didn't have to worry about that since Jesus would protect me from Satan. Even at a young age, this didn't make much sense to me. Where was the distinction between black cats being bad luck and Satan ruling over hell? Why was one superstition and one fact? But that's what grown-ups told me, and they wouldn't lie to me. What reason would they have for lying? A year later or so, a kid in the youth group asked if Adam and Eve were real people, and if the stories of Genesis were true. I had recently become very interested in science, and had spent a lot of time watching documentaries on TV. So, at my young age, I spoke up. "Don't be silly," I said. "Adam and Eve couldn't have been real people. If there were only two people, where would their children get their husbands and wives? They couldn't marry their siblings, because even if you do that, your children would have genetic defects. God must have made more than two people at the start of the world." My teacher gave me a disapproving look, but chose the ambiguous road. She said, "Well, we don't exactly know what happened back then, but what we do know is what God has told us, and that we trust in God's word." I didn't know what to make of that. Was she saying there were a literal Adam and Eve? To this day, I still don't know what she thought. I doubt even she herself knew. This story sowed the seeds of doubt in my mind, but those seeds were being planted in parched desert land. It would be a half-decade before anything sprouted. Still, the beginnings of doubt can be traced all the way here, to the old storybook stories about talking snakes, impossible floods, and men in giant fish. I heard each of these stories, and my young scientific mind protested to each. But I was still only a child, and I had no education or grasp of philosophy. I had a decent, if warped, understanding of logic, but it was the kind of logic that was operating under the presupposition that God was real. So the half-assed answers of my youth group leaders were grudgingly accepted. I guessed it was possible that God somehow made all those animals fit on the ark, Maybe he shrunk them down. I had seen superheroes and supervillains use shrink rays. Maybe God had one of those. I guess it could be that God just made all the water for the flood and then removed it later. He had made the whole world, after all. But these questions stayed with me, buried not so deep within my mind. It would take many more years of learning before the rusty cogs of logic in my mind would turn enough clicks to understand what was plain before me. But that didn't stop me searching. The answers I was being given were clearly bullshit. They were the same sort of answers given in fairy tales. They were the same answers given about Santa Claus, who I managed to figure out was not real at a rather young age. Still, even when these answers were given to me, they weren't entirely rejected. In my mind, I could tell they were a cop-out, but my continued mantra of, "Why would the grown-ups lie to me?" brushed aside most of my doubt. I remember going to my dad and asking him about all the stories I had heard in youth group. He knew everything, after all. Surely he had an explanation for this. And I was right. He told me that the stories we heard in the youth group were not entirely accurate. We were reading watered-down versions meant for children. The real stories, the actual ones in the Bible, were completely logical, and no one who read the Bible, as he had done, could doubt the truth of their claims. This satisfied and comforted me. It played right into my suspicions, confirming that the youth group people weren't telling me the whole truth of the story, yet at the same time strengthening my belief in God. It made sense to me. My dad was so much smarter than I was. When I was old enough, I would read the Bible and find out that he was right. It wouldn't be until high school that my doubts would surface again. My questions had been quelled, my curiosity of religion satisfied. But my curiosity for science was as strong as ever. My parents strongly stressed education and encouraged me in my pursuit of scientific knowledge. Little did they know it would one day be one of the 3 pillars of understanding that would lift me out of the bog of religion.